I think I just did.
Wonderful. Thank you.
We should figure out the real access rights here. But welcome to our KUDO community meeting. How's everyone doing? It's good to see Fabi back in shape.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm doing wonderful.
Yes, Tom was already suggesting we need some health checks for you.
I saw that, yeah, but just by Prometheus, okay? And they need to constantly monitor me.
Yeah, but what is the recovery? I think it's kind of like hard if the health check fails like 3 times. Are we going to kill you and resurrect you, or what's the plan there?
Combine it with a readiness probe and you have a kill grace period of a little longer, I would be very, very, like thankful. I don't want to get killed too early, like many other things, you know? I'm very stateful, so.
That's good to know. Okay, but you're actually a pre-KUDO entity, yes. Right? Okay.
Yeah, right.
All right. Then let's actually dive into the real meeting. I'm happy to share my screen because I have some meeting notes open already. What I put on here is to just a quick kickoff, which we hopefully successfully completed so far. I would have been interested if we had like new attendees, and maybe we can have that in following meetings as well, to just have a quick introduction. What's your interest? Like, what are your use cases, to just also for us to get to know the community? And maybe as it's just 3 here, we could discuss a little later on like how can we actually attract more people. I personally believe if we just send out a tweet via, for example, the Mesosphere account, we should actually have a larger audience interested in this here. Next, should we do a quick round of updates? What has happened in like code? What has happened in terms of meetings and other things?
Sounds good. I can get started with my last week. I've been working on implementing frameworks in KUDO and understanding or better understanding the challenges and delays in what that takes. I'm going to have some comments or suggestions on the CLI KEP about building skeletons for frameworks and framework versions that have a lot of the structure templated out, but more readily available so that we can more easily create one of these rather than me having to copy paste all around. I think that'll help simplify the initial setup, and then implementation details therein can be handled by the developer. One thing that I found slow going is when I update my framework version, because I'm iterating on what this framework version is supposed to look like. I just have to delete my instance, wait for things to clean up, and then redeploy my instance, and that's slow. But I think that's what should happen. If I update a framework version, I don't know by default whether something should get rerun on an instance. You know, if something just, I don't think I should rerun a deploy. Maybe I'm supposed to rerun an upgrade, and that's supposed to consider what that looks like. But that's a question I have in the community about what do you guys think should happen when a framework version gets updated?
Could it be that, I mean, I see that makes sense from like an operator perspective. Is that something we can just do to improve the developer experience, the developer process?
Okay. That'd be interesting, yeah. To be in a developer mode so that redeploys happen on updates. Or have it be a trigger and explicitly define an optional plan that if the plan is defined, when you update that framework version, it'll run that plan on all instances of that.
Yeah, something like that. And I mean, that can only be if like an end variable or something like that is set, just to kind of speed up development or just the experience.
Yeah. or maybe that should be on the instance object that you can specify when the parent framework version gets updated, I want you to rerun this plan. So if you're trying to work on your backup plan, you want to be able to say, well, let me update the framework version or the plan with that new process, and then have the plan get kicked off right away.
Yeah, I liked it with the trigger. So you say like you have a Boolean or something that if the parent framework version of this instance gets updated, and then you also define under upgrade plan or so as a string or so the plan name.
Yeah. Might be good.
I noticed that when I looked at the Flink one and how to do an upgrade, and it's easy. For instance, how when we do the scaling right now, when we look at the replica set, that it just like scales the replica set, but it's a little bit harder if you introduce new environment variables or on other parts of things that have to be then rendered, and so. Yeah. I think that rerunning then the whole instantiation is, I think, right now the only way to have not just like those special cases with replica sets on it, but also like having new environment variables and so forth introduced.
Just thinking, would that just be developer meaningful for developers? Because I personally feel like in operations, I probably want like more control, and in operations, this is not going to be such a frequent procedure, right? Okay, I might just put in some thoughts. I can add that as a to-do for me to like till the next time, just to prepare something around developer experience, if that makes sense. And I'll probably annoy you guys with questions during the next week for that.
Please do. And the last thing I noted, which was a unexpected feature, we actually have conditional YAML available. So in the KUDO Slack, I showed an example where I optionally deploy a dependent Flink cluster when I deploy my Flink app if I specify a parameter to be not empty. So I thought that was interesting that it works. I don't exactly like the syntax because it's not always clear that put false there. It treats it like a true because there's something there. So it's not a Boolean, it's a exists or not.
Yeah, I think we have that with the DCOS universe and there is that with a hashtag kind of, and
yep.
Yeah, so it just increases also a lot of boilerplate because you kind of like make the opposite case, and then that's why you duplicate sometimes a little bit.
Yeah, I found the not as well with the caret.
Yeah.
Specifically, the name of what I'm using a dependent cluster or not, I have a different service name that I want to use. One of them has the name of the objects prefixed and the other doesn't. So it's pretty handy for things like that. I think it'll be helpful for like more global configurations for like adding SSL. Like, oh, if you have this SSL, you're going to add all these arguments to your command line. There's all these environment variables to get set up. So having that control will be nice long term, but I'm not thrilled with the syntax. But
okay.
That's the choice we have right now.
But it's all right. It's very helpful to build a framework in the first place. So I think it's great.
Cool. Anything else?
No. I don't think anyone's issued a pull request to know that the Circle CI stuff is still working well.
Yeah, so I looked this morning at the pull request, and so in order for me to merge it, it needs at least 2 approves or so. Right now, it doesn't have them. Let's.
Can you just flag it to me? I'm happy to review it just after this.
Yeah, it's pull 138.
Okay, just flag it that it's on my to-do list.
I will do that. And also, like Tom, I think I answered all of your questions in the last week I was out, right? But before I remember we said like the things that are not addressed in this one, we maybe open an issue out of it or so and discuss it there further. And then we can always like fix it up later on. But I want to have this really merged. Yeah.
Cool. Fabi, I suppose you were last week mostly working on getting healthy?
Yep. So not much from my side. Sorry, guys.
No, I'm glad to see you made progress there. That's more important than anything else. And that we didn't have to kill and restart that pod here. Do you, either Fabi or Tom, do you know what Jared has been working on the past week?
I don't think he's been very much involved in the development side. He's been looking at dynamic CRDs and thinking about what that looks like. We've had a couple conversations offline about what we picture dynamic CRDs looking like from a user experience.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to set up a meeting for tomorrow, but he's traveling tomorrow night and he's on the West Coast, so the timing didn't work really well. So I think we're going to plan on Monday trying to reconvene. Maybe we can use the same Slack room and look at a couple different paradigms for what CRDs get dynamically generated.
Mm-hmm.
So right now we have this framework version that captures all the plan detail, and inside that specification for the framework version are the plans. So when you want to update how deploys happen, you actually update the framework version.
One thing where what I feel we should just also do is we should at some point just define like different user personas, right? Because I would see that if we go in the direction of dynamic CRDs, this is going to be like much more ops heavy just because of like the permissions required. Yeah. Oh, Jared is at least appearing in the doc here. Whereas if we could go other routes, it's also just like that the developer can just deploy more things or has more control. So it kind of depends like a bit on how we define different user personas, right?
Yeah, and permissions are definitely something we need to tackle. So maybe, I think there's a security group at Mesosphere. It'd be good to get their opinions on something like this.
Fabi, could you coordinate that?
Sure, yeah.
That would be awesome. So, I mean, I'm happy to write up the different user personas and just to kind of define them. And then it's kind of like for us to define like who should actually be able to do what, because I think that's going to influence some of those decisions.
Yeah, and then what types of objects these instances can actually modify and create and delete.
Yeah, exactly. That because, I mean, that's kind of then influenced by the design decisions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
But so this idea that we could actually have plans as a separate CRD, and then framework could have an initial deployment, and then you could provide custom plans to that framework version.
Yeah.
If you wanted to override how backups happen because you have to do something special, you could override the backup plan for your particular deployment. And maybe by deployment there, I mean the MySQL instances on your cluster, your CRD, not your instances CRD. Not your instances plan execution, but how that plan happens on your cluster. So I see that as a cluster level modification, not, you know, the marketing team has a backup that looks like this, and finance has a backup strategy that looks like that. With the same objects, I think it's at a cluster level. People who run backups for MySQL on this cluster have this updated plan that the sysadmins have installed.
Sounds good.
So I have some sample docs about what that might look like. Yeah.
Do you want to share them now or later?
Yeah, we can start that conversation, get you guys thinking over the weekend.
Cool.
Close
shall I stop sharing so you
Sure.
can?
And, all right, so all right, so the initial. I thought I had this. All right, so there's, I don't know where my framework version went, but when you create a framework, it creates object types of this kind. So by creating a cascade version, a cascade framework, you now have these version objects called V1 or V2. And then when you create each one of those, your V1 now allows the creation of, your V2 now allows the creation of task objects of version V2. Or V1 if you want to associate that task to your V1 framework version. Similar with plans. So you could now, given this idea of a MySQL framework version, I could now just create CRD instances, plan objects of type mysql.kudo.kh.io/57/4/ whatever framework version you want to associate that plan to. And you don't have to have control or modification of the framework version spec. You can supplement the framework version with plans as they become available. And there's no naming collision because each of the framework versions and types have a different name, are allowed to have a different name, I believe. So we could have a deploy plan for this framework and that framework and all these frameworks, and we don't have to worry about collisions like we currently do for framework versions. So right now, a lot of our framework versions look like Flink-1.0, and that's kind of redundant because it should just be 1.0 or whatever, and the association to the Flink framework should be captured somewhere else.
No, that totally makes sense, yes.
But how deep do we go? Are tasks their own one as well? Are these objects here their own CRD? Are the patches that we use CRD? We don't actually use any patches yet, but as customized, that's part of the capability. How deep do we go in creating these CRDs? But I think there's some value here in terms of the picture of a cohesive unit of objects to define how you manage your cascade object, cascade framework. But
yeah, by introducing those new kinds, it also gives you a better way to audit, see what actually changed. So I like that too. The cascade, that was just the name of that specific framework, or
yeah, okay. I should.
Just one question, like I'm just trying to picture like a very large cluster where multiple people are deploying this. Are we gonna like stress the API server at some point by creating so many CRDs?
No, I don't think so. Istio's got 20 plus.
yeah,
you're right. If we have a half dozen frameworks installed, now we've got 40, 50 CRDs. That's an interesting question.
Well, I think we just stress it. We don't stress etcd because there's so much safe there, right? But it maybe we run into something similar with controller runtime and the watches with dynamic CRDs. Yeah.
Right, because we're going to have a different watcher for each type, each API version / kind unique pair. So we'll have now 50 different watchers running in this one controller, and that might be a lot.
Yeah, so the way how we deal fails when the watcher fails or something is crucial there.
It'd be a good stress test to see how many watchers we can spin up.
Yeah, no, it's just something we should. I don't see it as an immediate problem. I just see it as like could become an issue depending on design decisions. And maybe that's also something we should just decide for ourselves, like what scale should we actually support? How many frameworks do we want to support on like a given cluster? Yeah.
Yep. Like one edge case I could think of was when you, for instance, are already on a way higher version, like 2.0 or something, but you still have 1.0 or even 0.1 or so somewhere in your cluster. If those are still watched, and what happens if changes happen to it, you know, like if that maybe triggers then weirdly an action or something that we actually don't want. So kind of one logic that basically just looks if you're actually always on the latest version, or like to trigger an action, maybe, I don't know. There's maybe some edge cases that we have to consider, right?
Yeah, I was, and that's a point further below. I was actually thinking whether we need like an ops metrics or dashboard to also just kind of avoid that there's some like old versions lingering around. First, I mean, you can in theory just get it all through like APIs and Kubernetes APIs, but I would just imagine like if we just had like a cool UI making it kind of easier or prepared metrics to just see or being warned if there's something like outdated in your cluster which actually no one is using potentially, and so on and so on.
That's an awesome, cool idea. I like it. Ready ideas for that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll come to that later because probably I should write a cap for that then.
All right, I'll give the screen back to you.
Cool. I mean, I'm just sharing the agenda, so nothing too fascinating on my side. All right. Any other updates, or are we pretty much done with updates?
I mean, one thing that I remembered, I met last week with our Mesosphere CLI team and talked a little bit about how they ship the CLI and how things are done there, which is very interesting. I think that we can use for the CLI. So we have in the universe, in the framework itself, a link to the actual zip file that of the CLI package that you have then. So when you want to install Kafka, it would look that up, and it would also go and basically download then it. I mean, you know that, Jörg and Tom.
Yeah.
So the one question would be like, should we do something similar when we like maybe ship then the special Flink package with the special commands tailored for it, or a core package of the CLI at some point, but also at the same time, because we host that kind of service ourselves. Right now, the CLI just uses the GitHub API to access the framework versions. And if that is also something that we maybe should do, having our own repo registry hosted. So I don't know. Those were two things that came up there as a thought. Yeah.
I think I'd still be an advocate of following Crew and trying to leverage what they have, since that seems to be a community-supported product.
Exactly, and that's what Jörg right now writes, because it's when it's air-gapped, this has also the potential that you can easily kind of wrap it up and ship it to the customer. Plus, because it's also like referenced in your kind of like package version or framework version, you can also easily automate it and see the dependencies and then download them and have everything bundled basically, and then have it deployed in an air-gapped cluster. So.
Yeah, I actually I would just add that as a to-do. I'm not sure whether it's a cap or something else, But I think that just should be like reflected in testing, in documentation. So it's kind of like a cross effort to just maybe first of all define whether that should be one of our goals, right? But I feel it's a very valid use case.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure whether CAP is the right term here, as it's kind of like more cross-functional, but I think we can make that as a CAP. Or what do you believe?
I think it's good to document right now what dependencies it has on the public internet. And for all of these air-gapped clusters, I think our biggest issue is going to be any framework we deploy is probably going to have a reference to a Docker image on Docker Hub. So in order to support air-gapping, the framework's going to need to have some features available to override the default Docker registry. Same with our controller. If our CLI does the install of our controller, we'll need to have that capability as well to point at a new Docker registry.
Yeah.
And being able to do an import-export of, give me all the images that are in frameworks in this repo, however that's defined, so that then I can upload them to my internal Artifactory server or whatever registry that the customer is using. Some sort of import-export is going to be helpful as well, even if it's,
then we just also need to define it's like, how do you actually update that, right? Like what happens if we push or someone else is pushing a new version of, I don't know, Kafka. So what is kind of the process of importing that to your air-gapped cluster?
Yeah.
Cool. But Fabius, you already started talking about the CLI. Should we continue with the CLI cap?
Yeah. That is, why is Tom there? Oh, okay. You mean what I talked earlier with that we need 2 reviews maybe, and I send it to you and you look at it, or like you mean just like that's the PR, but you mean like adding more features to it, maybe this air gap, or what I talked with the CLI, or what do you mean?
No, I think Tom wanted to talk about the CLI cap, right?
I had just mentioned that some of the features that I was talking about earlier are related to CLI interaction, like installing a controller on your cluster, and that.
Okay.
I haven't had a chance to go back through the comments. Sorry, Fabi.
No problem. Then I'll just jump to the next point, which is like a community repo for slides and videos. I would like to actually enable other people to talk about this as well. So I feel if we just had like a repo, probably like Google Slides are easier because people can then also modify them. But if we had like a repo, I would probably just call it like community or something like that, where we capture talks, where we can capture abstracts, where we can capture recordings. So basically just kind of like resources if you want to just be present in the community. Does that make sense?
Yep, and just looking up your low battery life makes me worry.
Yeah, I'm already looking. I've seen it. I just have to get up and plug it in. I'll survive.
Yeah, that makes totally sense. You wanna start maybe a Google slide? I can start a Google slide. Maybe we start with the slide deck that Tom had, and then iterate from there.
Yeah, I'm just like curious, where should that live? Should we create like a separate repo? Should we create one page in the documentation where we put all that, or what's kind of like the best way to capture all of that? So I feel if we would have artifacts we're checking in, then probably its own repo would be good, because otherwise it's just going to grow the normal repo. But if, as I would assume, most of them are links only, probably just having like one page in the documentation with links to external resources could be sufficient.
Yeah, and that would be also linked then on our homepage, I think, so people can further look it up. So
yeah.
So your audience for this, is this supposed to be people who want to try out or demo KUDO for different groups, they would come here and be able to obtain resources, examples of things, or someone who's coming in and trying to learn about KUDO?
No, it's someone who wants to give a talk. I mean, we can probably select like an intro video or something like that, but it's more like a general thing if I want to give a talk where I can get resources for that. Or I just imagine like later if we do workshops or something like that, this is where I would just put all the workshop material, and then people can, other people are able to also give workshops.
Yeah.
I think Git's probably the best place, because I know when I give talks or demos, I'll have a bunch of YAML there that I can show and interact with, and I'll apply it.
Yeah, so exactly. This is why I was kind of torn whether it should be its own repo or something else. Because as soon as we start checking like a lot of YAML, a lot of demos in there, I totally see that it would make sense to have its own repo. When it's just like a link collection, then it probably just makes more sense in docs.
Would it be make sense to call it a workshop repo or something? And that has all of the YAMLs in there, but then we have the slides living in Google that link then to that workshop YAMLs?
Yeah, this is why I was thinking about just call it like community repo, because it would be slides, it would be workshops and other stuff.
Even better, it's even higher level, yeah.
Does it make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Okay, cool.
Should we file an issue for that to follow up as a to-do, or should we do from all the to-dos issues?
We can do issues from all the to-dos, sure. Okay, we already talked about air-gapped clusters, and the last item I had basically refers to documentation and this ops dashboard. So I was just thinking maybe ops dashboard should be its own item. But it just fits with developer experience. So I feel we should really invest like some effort into the documentation. For example, that video is still like the old video with the Mastro stuff. And I would really love to see that updated to KUDO at some point.
Yeah. We met yesterday with the logo team for some logos for KUDO too. So I think once we have their full logo and everything.
Okay, cool.
And I have one more question about the I don't like the workflow that I added with the milestones for some reason. Creating milestones, adding issues to it, and so forth. It wouldn't make sense to use maybe GitHub projects in order to kind of like coordinate that type of work, and then using milestones a little more for the versions that are released, or what do you think? Or is it the overkill? We don't need that right now. But I really like this Kanban board with other projects like coordinating there as well. And it's maybe also easier for people to see what's the current state of development and what we're working on right now.
I'm not super familiar with the project inside of a GitHub repo, so I'm not sure if that's the right approach, but we're happy to try that out if you've tried out these milestones and it doesn't seem to really fit into how we want to manage. I think it's good to try something else. It's
intermingled with the version thing, but maybe we just let this idea sit and just look at it, and if it actually makes sense, I mean, it could be a candidate.
I feel that's going to become probably more an issue as soon as we have more developers or larger community. So
let's keep it on the radar.
Yeah. Yeah, as the ops dashboard, we already talked about that. I'll probably just start a cat for that. And then we can just discuss it there.
I think that ops dashboard should talk about the application CRD. The SIGApps developed a standard that's supposed to try and standardize the way different applications get deployed and can be summarized. Yep. So I think it would be interesting to look to see what type of dashboards are currently available for the application CRD. And if there's none available, we could be the leading edge for integrating with that. And then as these instances come out, they should also be creating the app CRDs that are then consumed by these dashboards. I think that might be the right place to start pulling that stuff in.
That's a good apps here. The integration. I'm not sure what's like a good title, but I know what you mean. Just not how can I? Yeah, we all know what's meant by that. People hopefully can see it in the recording. All right. Anything else? Cool. Thanks. We still need a host for next week's meeting. I'm happy to do it again. If someone else wants to, also happy for.
We were rotating, so the natural order would be a new person or Jared again. Or I can do it as well if we find
Okay.
no. Just add me for now maybe, and then if you find someone else, if that's
cool.
okay.
Yeah, that's okay. All right, cool. Otherwise, thank you so much. Let's keep talking on the Slack channel and talk to you latest next week.
And don't run out of power here.
Right, 4%.
No.
Yeah,
Yes. I mean, this is wait. Perfect timing. I planned for this to work for another 5 minutes when the meeting would have officially ended.
Wonderful. All right.
Cool. Real hard stop, if you will.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Guys.
Bye, guys.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.